My hands trembled as I lifted the wooden lid. The brass hinges creaked after decades of stillness, and the sound echoed through the empty barn like a whisper from the past. Inside the box, wrapped in faded blue ribbon, sat a bundle so thick I could barely circle my fingers around it. Letters, hundreds of them. Each envelope bore my name in handwriting that shook with age or illness, or both, and each one carried the same damning stamp in red ink. Return to sender, unable to forward. I pulled one from the middle of the stack. The postmark read 14 years ago, my 8th birthday. My fingers moved on their own, sliding the yellowed paper free. Dear Iris, it began. Today you turn 8 years old. I hope wherever you are, someone is making you feel special. Someone is giving you cake with candles and presents wrapped in bright paper. I wish I could be that person. I wish I could hold you and tell you how much your grandmother loves you. The words blurred. I set that letter aside and reached for another. 9th birthday. Returned. Christmas 3 years later. Returned. A random Tuesday in April when I would have been 12. Returned. Every birthday, every holiday. Random days when she must have woken up thinking of me and couldn't bear the silence any longer. 247 letters. 14 years of trying to reach a granddaughter she'd never known. 14 years of love that never found its way home. But how did I get here? How did a girl who grew up believing no one wanted her end up in a barn in Vermont, holding proof that someone had fought for her all along? Let me go back to where it all started, 3 days earlier. The oatmeal had gone cold an hour ago. I stared at the gray paste in my bowl, the powdered milk that never quite dissolved right, leaving white specks on the surface like snow on dirty water. This was the breakfast I'd eaten for 14 years at St. Catherine's Home for Children. This was the last time I'd have to pretend it tasted like anything other than institutional neglect. My name is Iris Cadence Walker. Most people just called me Walker, if they called me anything at all. 21 years old meant the state of Ohio had officially run out of reasons to keep me. The foster care system doesn't believe in extended stays. You age out at 21 whether you're ready or not. I wasn't ready. 2 duffel bags and 1 backpack sat on the narrow bed I'd slept in for the past 3 years. Everything I owned in this world fit into 3 bags. Some clothes, mostly secondhand. A few books from library sales. 1 photograph that had grown soft and creased from too much handling over too many lonely nights. The photograph showed my parents young and smiling, standing in front of a white farmhouse I didn't recognize. My mother had dark hair like mine, pulled back in a ponytail. My father had his arm around her waist. They both looked so happy it hurt to look at them. Claire and David Walker. They died when I was 7. Car accident on a rainy November night. One moment I had a family, a home, a life that made sense. The next moment I had nothing but this photograph and a social worker explaining that I'd be going somewhere safe. Somewhere safe turned out to be a lot of places. Foster homes that didn't work out, group facilities when no one else would take me. I learned early not to unpack completely, not to get too comfortable, not to expect anything to last. Mrs. Delacroix knocked on my door at exactly 8 o'clock. She was the social worker assigned to my case, a tired woman in her 50s who had seen too many kids like me pass through her files. The weariness in her eyes made me think this job would wear anyone down eventually. She gave me that sympathetic smile I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that meant someone was about to deliver news they thought was bad, but had learned to package as opportunity. Are you ready, Iris? There are a few things we need to go over before you leave. I nodded and followed her down the hallway one last time, past rooms of other kids who weren't old enough yet to be pushed out into the world. Past the cafeteria, where I'd eaten thousands of forgettable meals. Past the common room, where I'd spent countless hours staring at a television I wasn't really watching. In her office, Mrs. Delacroix settled behind her desk and pulled out a folder with my name on it. After 14 years, my entire existence in the system had been reduced to that one thin folder. You have your identification documents, your birth certificate, social security card? Yes, ma'am. And you understand the resources available to you? The transitional housing program, the job placement services? Yes, ma'am. She nodded, then paused. Her hand went to an envelope sitting separate from my file, and something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe. Or curiosity. There's one more thing. This came for you last week, from a law office in Vermont. I nearly forgot about it with everything else going on. She handed me the envelope. It was thick, made of expensive cream-colored paper with a return address from a firm called Whitfield & Associates in Burlington, Vermont. I'd never known anyone in Vermont. I'd never known anyone who used paper this nice. I opened it carefully, half expecting it to bite. Inside was a letter from an attorney named Atticus Whitfield, informing me that my maternal grandmother, Miriam Estelle Hartwell, had passed away 3 months earlier at the age of 79. I read the words twice before they made sense. My grandmother. I barely remembered her. There had been a few visits when I was very young, before the accident. Blurry memories of a white farmhouse, of hands that smelled like wood and varnish, of a voice calling me little one. But after my parents died, nothing. The system had tried to contact her when I entered foster care. She declined to take custody. Too old, they said. Lives too remotely, unable to care for a child. The rejection had burned for years. My own grandmother hadn't wanted me. I had family out there somewhere, someone connected to me by blood, and she'd chosen to let me become a ward of the state rather than take me in. I'd spent so many nights wondering why. What was wrong with me that even my own grandmother didn't want me? Eventually, I stopped wondering. I locked those questions away in a part of my heart I tried never to visit. But according to this letter, my grandmother had left me something in her will. I kept reading. The words blurred together until I had to blink to clear my vision. A farm in rural Vermont, 68 acres of land. A farmhouse, a barn, various outbuildings. A savings account containing approximately $15,247.89. The letter instructed me to contact Mr. Whitfield to arrange the transfer of property and to retrieve a personal package my grandmother had left specifically for me. $15,000. I had $78 in my pocket. I had never in my life possessed more than a few hundred at once. 15,000 might as well have been 15 million. And a farm. 68 acres. I didn't even know how big that was, but it sounded enormous. It sounded impossible. It sounded like a mistake. Mrs. Delacroix was watching me with undisguised curiosity. Everything all right? My grandmother died. I heard myself say the words like they belonged to someone else. She left me a farm. Girls like me didn't inherit farms. Girls like me inherited nothing but bad luck and low expectations. A farm? Mrs. Delacroix leaned forward. In Vermont? That's what it says. I handed her the letter and watched her eyes widen as she read. Iris, this is... She shook her head slowly. This could change everything for you. Could it? I wasn't sure I believed that. In my experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. There would be a catch. There was always a catch. But still, a farm, 68 acres, a farmhouse with my family name attached to it, and a grandmother who had rejected me 14 years ago but had apparently thought about me at the end. Why? Why leave me anything after all this time? If she didn't want me when I was a scared 7-year-old who needed her, why did she want me to have her farm now? The questions multiplied in my mind, but I had no answers. Only that letter and a growing sense that everything I thought I knew about my life was about to change. I called the number on the letterhead from a payphone outside St. Catherine's. My hands were still shaking as I dialed. Mr. Whitfield answered on the third ring. His voice was warm and professional, the voice of someone who had spent decades delivering both good news and bad with equal measures of dignity. Miss Walker, I've been hoping you'd call. I'm so sorry for your loss. My loss. As if I'd lost something. As if you could lose someone you never really had. Thank you, I said, because that's what you're supposed to say. Your grandmother was very specific in her instructions. She wanted you to have the farm when you turned 18 or aged out of the foster system, whichever came first. She also left a letter for you that I'm required to give you in person, along with some other items she wanted you to have. Why didn't she? I stopped myself. The question felt too big for a phone call. Mr. Whitfield seemed to understand what I was asking. Your grandmother had her reasons for the choices she made. I think her letter will explain some things. When can you come to Burlington? When could I come? I had nowhere else to be. No job waiting for me. No apartment lined up. No life to return to. The transitional housing program Mrs. Delacroix mentioned had a waiting list 3 months long. I've been planning to stay in a shelter until something opened up. Now I had somewhere else to go. Somewhere that apparently belonged to me. As soon as I can get there. The Greyhound bus wound through countryside that looked like it belonged on a postcard. I'd spent $52 of my $78 on the ticket, leaving me with just enough for maybe 2 meals if I was careful. The trip would take nearly 12 hours, with stops in places I'd never heard of and would probably never see again. I settled into a seat near the back where I could watch the world slide by through a scratched window. The other passengers were a mix of tired travelers and people who looked like they were running from something. I fit right in. As Ohio gave way to Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania to New York, I thought about my mother. She'd grown up on that farm in Vermont. She'd walked those 68 acres, lived in that farmhouse, known my grandmother in ways I never would. What had made her leave? The letter from Mr. Whitfield mentioned that she'd been estranged from my grandmother for years before the accident. Why? What could drive a daughter away from her mother so completely? I pulled out the photograph of my parents and studied it again. That white farmhouse in the background. Was that the farm? Was I looking at the place I was about to inherit without even knowing it? My mother's face gave me no answers. She just smiled at the camera, young and beautiful and utterly unaware that she had less than a decade left to live. I fell asleep somewhere in New York and woke up as we crossed into Vermont. The landscape had changed while I slept. Rolling hills covered in the last patches of winter snow, white farmhouses with red barns, stone walls that wound through fields like ancient rivers frozen in place. It looked like a different world entirely from the flat gray streets of Cleveland I'd left behind. Burlington was smaller than I'd expected, but it had a charm I hadn't anticipated. Victorian houses lined the streets downtown, and Lake Champlain glittered in the distance under a pale March sky. Mr. Whitfield's office was in one of those Victorian houses, converted into professional space but still holding on to its original character. The porch steps groaned softly under my feet as I climbed them. He met me in the foyer, a man in his mid-60s with gray hair and kind brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Miss Walker, Iris, thank you for coming all this way. He shook my hand with a firm grip that was somehow also gentle. "Please, come in. Can I get you some coffee? You must be exhausted." I was exhausted. 12 hours on a bus with nothing but vending machine food and my own swirling thoughts for company. But more than tired, I was anxious. I needed to understand what was happening, why I was here, what any of this meant. He led me to his office, a comfortable room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a large wooden desk that looked like it had been there for a century. He settled me into a leather chair worn soft from years of use, then sat across from me. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She lived alone on that farm for over 40 years, ever since your grandfather passed. She was fiercely independent, maybe too much so for her own good, but she had her reasons for the choices she made." He reached into his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front in handwriting that trembled and shook. The handwriting of someone old or sick or both. "She asked me to give you this in person." She spent a long time on it toward the end, writing and rewriting until she got it right. I took the envelope. It felt heavier than paper should feel, like it contained not just words, but years of silence, years of questions, years of wondering why. Should I read it now? That's up to you, but I think you might want some privacy for it. I nodded and slipped the envelope into my jacket pocket, against my heart. I wasn't ready yet. I needed to prepare myself for whatever was inside. Mr. Whitfield continued explaining the details of my inheritance. The farm had been sitting empty since my grandmother's death, maintained by a local property manager named Fletcher Brennan, who'd been paid from the estate. Fletcher has been checking on the place twice a week, making sure everything stays secure and winterized. He's a good man. Knew your grandmother for 30 years. He's expecting your call. Then Mr. Whitfield's expression grew serious. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "There's something else you should know. Your grandmother was very specific about this. She said to tell you to trust Fletcher completely. And she said..." He paused, as if weighing whether to continue. "She said to be careful. That not everyone who comes to you will have good intentions." A chill ran down my spine. What had my grandmother been afraid of? What kind of danger could possibly be waiting for me on a farm in rural Vermont? He handed me a set of keys, heavy and old-fashioned, and a thick folder containing all the property documents, insurance information, and financial records. "The property taxes are $4,200 a year, already paid through the end of this year. Homeowner's insurance is $1,800 annually, also current. The $15,000 in the bank account is yours free and clear, but you'll need to budget carefully." It sounds like a lot, but between taxes, insurance, utilities, and general living expenses, you're looking at maybe 6 to 8 months of breathing room. Not a fortune, just options. I thanked him and left his office feeling overwhelmed by the weight of everything I'd learned. 24 hours ago, I was a foster kid with nothing. Now I had property, assets, possibilities I'd never imagined, and a warning from beyond the grave that I didn't understand. I found a small diner near the bus station and ordered coffee I didn't really want, just to have somewhere to sit and think. The place smelled of bacon grease and strong coffee, and the vinyl booth creaked when I slid into it. A few locals sat at the counter, paying no attention to the girl with the duffel bags and the shell-shocked expression. I pulled out the envelope and stared at my name in that shaky handwriting. Miriam Estelle Hartwell had written these words. My grandmother, a woman I'd tried so hard not to think about for 14 years. I opened it carefully, as if the paper might crumble at my touch. Inside were several pages covered in that same trembling script. I smoothed them flat on the table and began to read. My dearest Iris, it began. I imagine you're confused, probably angry too. You have every right to those feelings. I won't insult you by asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. What I can offer you is an explanation, and I hope, a chance at the life your mother would have wanted for you. Your mother and I were estranged, a falling out that festered for years over choices and stubbornness and words that couldn't be taken back. Pride, I called it. The kind of pride that masquerades as principle until it's too late to tell the difference. When social services contacted me after the accident, I wanted desperately to say yes. But I was 65 years old, living alone on a remote farm with declining health. I was already struggling to take care of myself. How could I care for a grieving 7-year-old child who had just lost everything? I convinced myself it was selfless, that you deserved better than an elderly grandmother in the middle of nowhere who couldn't give you what you needed. I told myself the system would find you a good family, people who could give you stability and love and a real chance at life. I was wrong. I was a coward. And I've spent every day since then regretting the choice I made. I couldn't take you in. But I never stopped thinking about you. I contacted social services regularly, requesting updates on your placement. They wouldn't tell me where you were. Privacy laws, they said. But I never stopped trying. I set aside money for your future, adding to it every year. I planned obsessively for the day you would age out of the system, the day I could finally try to make things right. The farm is your inheritance. It's been in our family for 5 generations, and I want you to have it. Do with it as you wish. If you want to sell it and use the money to start a life somewhere else, I'll understand. But if you want to keep it, to build something there, everything you need to get started is waiting for you. There's something waiting for you in the barn, in the tack room at the back. It will explain everything else you need to know. But please, darling girl, be careful. There are people who might try to take what belongs to you now. Not everyone can be trusted. But Fletcher Brennan is a good man, and he was my friend for 30 years. Trust him. He'll help you. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be the grandmother you deserved, but I hope this farm can give you the foundation I failed to provide. I hope you'll find your roots there, the way I once hoped your mother would find hers. I love you, Iris. I've always loved you, even when I couldn't find the courage to show it. The letter was signed simply, Miriam. I sat in that diner for a long time after I finished reading, the words replaying in my mind while the waitress refilled my coffee twice without asking. All those years of feeling unwanted, all those nights wondering what was wrong with me. And she'd been thinking about me the whole time, regretting, planning, hoping. It didn't erase the loneliness. It didn't undo the damage of 14 years in a system that treated children like problems to be managed rather than people to be loved. But something shifted inside me anyway, like a key turning in a lock I'd forgotten existed. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. Maybe I never had been. Fletcher Brennan arrived at exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, driving a mud-spattered pickup truck that looked like it had survived 30 Vermont winters. He was a tall man in his late 50s, with weathered skin that spoke of decades spent outdoors, and kind eyes that crinkled when he saw me waiting on the motel steps with my bags. "You look just like her," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Your grandmother. Same gray eyes." We drove out of Burlington and into the countryside, the roads getting narrower and the houses farther apart. Stone walls lined the fields on either side, some of them looking so old they might have grown out of the earth itself. The sky was heavy with clouds that threatened late winter snow, but there was something beautiful about the bareness of the landscape, the way you could see for miles across the sleeping fields. Your grandmother loved this land. Said it was in her blood, same as breathing. She couldn't imagine living anywhere else. But my mother left, I said. He nodded slowly. She did. That nearly broke Miriam's heart, I think. But she never stopped hoping Claire would come back someday. He glanced at me. Your mother's name was Claire. Claire Ellen Walker before she married. Most beautiful girl in the county, according to Miriam. Stubborn as a mule, too. Claire. I'd known my mother's name, of course, but hearing it spoken aloud by someone who'd known the family felt different. It made her more real somehow, more present. We turned onto a gravel driveway marked by a weathered wooden sign that read, Hartwell Family Farm, established 1887. 1887. Over 130 years of my family's history rooted in this one piece of land. The thought made my chest tighten. The farmhouse came into view first, a classic New England structure, white clapboard with green shutters and a wraparound porch that sagged slightly on one side. The paint was peeling in places, and a few windows had been boarded up against the winter. But even in its current state, there was something solid about it, something that spoke of shelter and endurance. Needs some work, Fletcher said, as if reading my thoughts. But the bones are good. Your grandmother kept up with the important things. New roof 5 years ago, furnace replaced last winter, foundation solid as the day it was laid. Behind the house stood a large red barn, its paint faded to a soft rust color that seemed to glow in the gray morning light. Several smaller outbuildings were scattered around the property, and beyond them, fields stretched toward the tree line in the distance. 68 acres. I still couldn't comprehend how much land that was. Fletcher parked the truck near the house, and we got out. The air hit me first, so clean and cold it almost hurt to breathe. It smelled different here. Earth and wood smoke, and something organic I couldn't quite name. The smell of living things, even in the middle of winter. Your grandmother spent most of her time in the barn. That's where her real work was. Come on, I'll show you. The barn doors were massive, and they groaned like old bones as Fletcher slid them open. What I saw inside stopped me in my tracks. I'd expected farming equipment, maybe some old hay bales, rusted tools, the forgotten remnants of agricultural life. What I found instead took my breath away. The main area had been transformed into a workshop. Tools hung on pegboards along the walls, organized with almost obsessive precision. Workbenches ran the length of both sides, their surfaces worn smooth from years of use. Half-finished projects sat on various stands, pieces of furniture in different stages of completion. But it was the back section that made my heart stop completely. The entire rear third of the barn had been converted into a professional furniture-making studio. Specialized saws, lathes, sanders, and finishing equipment filled the space, all of it expensive-looking and meticulously maintained. Shelves held different types of wood, each one carefully labeled and stored. Oak, maple, cherry, walnut, birch, ash. And along one wall stood at least 15 completed pieces. Tables and chairs and cabinets and decorative items, each one crafted with a level of skill that seemed almost impossible. The wood glowed with deep, rich finishes. The joinery was so precise, you couldn't see where one piece ended and another began. Your grandmother was one of the finest furniture makers in Vermont. Fletcher's voice was quiet beside me as I tried to process what I was seeing. Self-taught, if you can believe it. Started after your grandfather died, as a way to cope with the grief. Turned out she had a real gift. I walked through the studio in a daze, running my fingers over the smooth surfaces, examining the intricate details. Each piece showed not just technical skill, but artistry. Love. These weren't just functional objects. They were works of art. She sold pieces to galleries and collectors all over New England. That's how she supported herself all these years. That's how she saved the money she left you. For me. All those pieces she'd sold, all those hours bent over her workbench, and the money had gone into an account waiting for the day I would finally come home. I hadn't even known I had a home to come to. She wanted you to have all of this. The tools, the wood, the finished pieces, everything. She hoped maybe you'd want to learn the craft, carry it forward. But she also knew you might want to sell it all and do something completely different. Either way, she wanted you to have choices. Choices. My whole life I'd never had choices. I'd gone where the system sent me, stayed where I was told to stay, left when it was time to leave. The idea that I could decide my own future felt foreign and frightening and wonderful all at once. Fletcher led me to the tack room at the back of the barn, a small enclosed space that had been converted into an office. Inside was a desk, a filing cabinet, and several large wooden boxes stacked neatly against the wall. This is what she mentioned in her letter. She spent her last few months organizing everything for you. Business records, client contacts, tutorials she'd written. She even made video recordings of herself explaining different techniques in case you wanted to learn. I opened the first box and found it filled with leather-bound journals, each one labeled with dates and topics. Furniture Making Basics, 1985. Advanced Joinery Techniques, 1992. Finishing and Restoration, 2001. There were dozens of them, representing decades of accumulated knowledge and experience. In another box, I found USB drives labeled with video file names. 47 of them, each one numbered and dated. In another, business cards from galleries and collectors, and a ledger showing sales and commissions from the past 20 years. My grandmother had built an entire business, an entire life, and she'd left it all to me. At the bottom of the last box, I found another wooden container. This one was smaller, beautifully crafted, with my name carved into the lid in elegant script. Iris. When I tried to open it, I discovered it was locked. There was no visible keyhole, just smooth wood with no obvious mechanism. On the lid, beneath my name, were carved additional words. Open when you're ready. I stared at those words, trying to understand what they meant. Ready for what? How would I know when I was ready? Fletcher noticed my confusion. She worked on that box for months, wouldn't tell me what was inside, just said it was the most important thing she had to give you, and that you'd find the key when you were meant to. More mysteries, more questions. I set the box aside, knowing I'd need to find that key eventually, but for now there was too much else to absorb. 2 weeks passed in a blur of discovery and growing anxiety. I moved into the farmhouse, sleeping in my grandmother's bedroom with the windows that looked out over the fields she'd loved. Fletcher checked on me every few days, teaching me the basics of property maintenance, showing me which systems worked and which needed attention. His wife Opal brought casseroles and homemade bread, staying to share meals and tell me stories about Miriam that made my grandmother feel more real with each passing day. I spent hours in the barn, watching my grandmother's video tutorials on the laptop Fletcher had loaned me. In the recordings, Miriam was 73 years old, her silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her canvas apron covered in sawdust. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes were sharp and alive, and her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades mastering her craft. "The wood will tell you what it wants to become," she said in one video, tracing the grain pattern in a piece of cherry wood with tenderness that made my chest ache. "You just have to learn how to listen." I tried to learn. I practiced basic cuts on scrap wood, following her patient instructions. Most of my attempts ended in failure, but I kept trying anyway. There was something meditative about the work, something that made the loneliness of the empty farmhouse feel less overwhelming. But underneath the routine of these quiet days, a thread of unease ran constant. My grandmother's warning echoed in my mind. Not everyone who comes to you will have good intentions. Be careful. On the 14th day, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel and looked up from the video I was watching. A black Mercedes SUV pulled up in front of the farmhouse, spotless and expensive, the kind of vehicle that looked out of place on these muddy country roads. The man who stepped out matched the car perfectly. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything I owned combined, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine that would last about 30 seconds on this ground. He was in his early 50s with graying hair slicked back from a face that might have been handsome if it weren't for the coldness in his eyes. His smile when he spotted me walking toward him didn't reach those eyes at all. "You must be Iris." He extended his hand. "Vincent Mercer. I was a business associate of your grandmother's." I shook his hand because that's what you do when someone offers, but something in my stomach tightened immediately. My grandmother's warning echoed louder. There are people who might try to take what belongs to you now. I don't think she ever mentioned you. His smile flickered just for a moment before settling back into place. Well, we had a professional relationship, not a personal one. I'm in the furniture business, you see. High-end pieces for discerning collectors. Your grandmother was one of my suppliers for many years. I didn't respond. I'd learned in the foster system that silence often got you more information than questions did. Vincent looked around the property with an appraising eye, taking in the farmhouse, the barn, the fields stretching toward the distant tree line. Beautiful place. Must be worth quite a bit these days, with property values going up the way they are. "Can I help you with something, Mr. Mercer?" He turned back to me, and the pretense of friendliness dropped from his face like a mask being removed. What remained underneath was harder, sharper, more calculating. "Actually, yes. I'm afraid I have some unpleasant news." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded document. "Your grandmother and I had an agreement, a contract for a large commission she never completed. 12 custom pieces for a client in Boston, due 6 months ago." He handed me the document. I unfolded it and scanned the contents, my heart sinking with every line. It was a formal contract dated 18 months ago, outlining the terms of a commission worth $55,000. My grandmother had apparently received a $22,500 advance, with the remaining $32,500 due upon completion and delivery. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Miriam E. Hartwell, in handwriting that looked almost exactly like the shaky script in her letter to me. "As you can see," Vincent continued, his voice smooth as oil on water, "your grandmother took a significant advance for work she never delivered. Now that she's passed, that debt falls to her estate." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Which means it falls to you." I stared at the contract, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. $22,500. My grandmother had left me $15,247.89. Even if I emptied the entire account, I'd still be $8,000 short. I don't have this kind of money. I understand completely. It's a difficult situation. His voice dripped with false sympathy. But business is business, as they say. I've already been more than patient, given the circumstances. I waited 3 months after your grandmother's death before pursuing this matter. But my client is getting impatient, and I have my own reputation to consider. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over me like a heavy blanket. However, I'm prepared to offer you a solution. I have contacts in real estate who would be very interested in this property. They've authorized me to make you an offer. $65,000 for the farm, the buildings, everything. That would more than cover your debt to me, and you'd walk away with $42,500 in your pocket. Not a bad outcome for someone in your position. $65,000 for a property worth at least $250,000. I might have been raised in the foster system without much formal education, but I wasn't stupid. This man was trying to steal my inheritance using a contract that might or might not be legitimate. I need time to think about this. Of course, I'm not an unreasonable man. He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out to me. But I should mention that my patience does have limits. If we can't reach an agreement within 60 days, I'll have no choice but to pursue legal action. Courts, lawyers, depositions, all that unpleasantness. It would be expensive for both of us, but I suspect it would be considerably more expensive for you. He smiled, that cold smile again, the one that never touched his eyes. Think it over, Iris. I'll be in touch. He walked back to his Mercedes with the casual confidence of someone who was used to getting exactly what he wanted. The engine purred to life, and he drove away, leaving me standing in the driveway with a contract in my hands and fear coiling tight in my stomach. I looked down at the signature on the paper. It looked real. It looked exactly like my grandmother's handwriting. But something felt wrong about it. Wrong about him. Wrong about all of this. I turned and walked back to the barn, to the tack room where that locked wooden box sat on the shelf with my name carved into the lid. Open when you're ready. My grandmother's voice from one of her videos echoed in my memory. Inside the box is everything you need to protect yourself and build the life you deserve. But I couldn't protect myself without the key, and I had no idea where to find it. The locked box seemed to mock me with its secrets. 60 days, Vincent Mercer had said. 2 months to find proof that his contract was fake, or lose everything, before I'd even had time to understand what I'd been given. My hands trembled as I picked up the box and turned it over, looking for any clue, any hint of where the key might be hidden. The wood was smooth and seamless, the craftsmanship perfect. My grandmother had made this. She'd carved my name into it. She'd locked something inside that she said I needed. But where was the key? And how would I know when I was ready to find it? The contract felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as I drove Fletcher's borrowed truck down the gravel road toward his property. He'd insisted I take it for running errands, said I couldn't be stuck on the farm without transportation. Now I was grateful for more than just the convenience. His workshop sat behind his house, a smaller version of my grandmother's barn. I found him bent over a piece of oak, sanding it with the kind of patience that comes from decades of practice. When he looked up and saw my face, he set down his tools immediately. What happened? I pulled out the contract and handed it to him. A man named Vincent Mercer came to the farm. He says Grandma owed him $22,500 for furniture she never delivered. Fletcher's face went through a transformation I'd never seen before. The kindness in his eyes hardened to something close to rage. His jaw clenched as he read the document, and when he looked up, his voice was rough with barely contained anger. That snake. I should have known he'd come crawling around once Miriam was gone. You know him? Unfortunately. Fletcher wiped sawdust from his hands with more force than necessary. 8 years ago, Vincent Mercer showed up at your grandmother's farm with what he called a partnership proposal. Wanted her to mass-produce her designs in his factories, said he'd pay her a licensing fee. Miriam saw through it immediately. He was planning to slap her name on cheap garbage and destroy her reputation while he made millions. She threw him off the property and told him if she ever saw his face again, she'd call the sheriff. But this contract... I gestured to the paper in his hands. It has her signature. It looks real. Fletcher studied it more carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. The handwriting does look like hers, I'll give him that. But Miriam would never have done business with that man. She hated him, told everyone in town to stay away from him. Then how do I prove the contract is fake? He was quiet for a moment, thinking hard. Sheriff Crane might be able to help. He's been trying to build a case against Vincent for years. Fraud, mostly. The man has a way of producing convenient contracts whenever someone dies who can't contradict him. This has happened before? Henderson family last year. Morrison family the year before that.
He waits until someone passes, then shows up with a contract claiming they owed him money. By the time the family figures out what's happening, he's already pressured them into selling their property for pennies on the dollar. The words landed in my stomach like stones. I wasn't the first person Vincent Mercer had tried to cheat. I was just the latest in a pattern. The door to the workshop opened, and Opal Brennan stepped inside, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She took one look at my face and set the basket down, moving toward me with the kind of maternal instinct I hadn't experienced in 14 years. "What's wrong, honey?" Fletcher explained while Opal listened, her expression shifting from concern to recognition to cold fury. When he finished, she pulled me into a hug that smelled like bread and vanilla. "Your grandmother loved you. She talked about you all the time, especially toward the end. She planned for this day for years, and she wouldn't let some con artist take it away from you. We won't either." The warmth of her embrace cracked something inside me. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to tell me I wasn't fighting this battle alone. "Go see Sheriff Crane today," Fletcher said. "I'll call ahead and let him know you're coming. He's been waiting for years to pin something solid on Vincent Mercer." The county sheriff's office occupied a brick building on Main Street, sandwiched between a hardware store and a diner. Inside, Sheriff Hollis Crane sat behind a desk that looked like it had served several generations of law enforcement. He was a big man in his mid-50s with a thick mustache and eyes that had seen too much but still held warmth. "So you're Miriam's granddaughter." He gestured for me to sit. "She talked about you every time I saw her in town. Asked me once if I knew any way to track you down through the system. I told her it was complicated, privacy laws and all that, but she never stopped hoping." The words hit harder than I expected. Another person telling me my grandmother had thought about me constantly while I'd believed I was forgotten. "Fletcher said you might be able to help." I told him about Vincent Mercer, about the contract, about the 60-day ultimatum. As I spoke, Sheriff Crane's expression shifted through recognition to grim understanding. That son of a gun. Same trick he pulled on the Hendersons and the Morrisons before them. He leaned back in his chair with a heavy sigh. "Vincent Mercer is smart. He's been doing this for years, and we've never been able to pin anything concrete on him. The signatures always look authentic enough that we can't prove forgery without expensive handwriting analysis that most families can't afford. By the time they get a lawyer involved, Vincent's already pressured them into settling or selling. But if the signatures are fake, almost certainly they are, but proving it is the problem." He leaned forward, fixing me with a serious look. "Your grandmother was one of the most meticulous record keepers I've ever known. If there's evidence that contract is fake, it'll be somewhere in her files. A letter, a journal entry, a note to herself. Something that proves she never would have done business with Vincent Mercer. You just have to find it." I nodded, but the task felt overwhelming. I'd been going through those boxes in the tack room for 2 weeks, organizing papers, trying to understand my grandmother's business. But I hadn't been looking for evidence of fraud. "Keep searching," Sheriff Crane said, "and call me the moment you find anything. I've been waiting 5 years for the proof I need to put that man away." I spent the next 3 days tearing through every file, every journal, every scrap of paper in my grandmother's office. Client lists, sales receipts, correspondence with galleries and collectors. I read until my eyes burned and the words blurred together, looking for any mention of Vincent Mercer. Nothing. The locked box sat on the desk, mocking me with its silence. My grandmother had said it contained everything I needed, but the key remained hidden somewhere I couldn't find it. On the fourth night, frustration drove me to a different approach. If I couldn't find written evidence, maybe the answer was in the videos. Miriam had made 47 recordings over the years, patient tutorials explaining her techniques. I'd watched the first 8, trying to learn the basics of her craft. But there were 39 more I hadn't seen. What if she'd mentioned Vincent in one of them? What if there was a clue I'd missed? I made coffee and settled in for a long night. Video 9 showed her demonstrating how to select wood based on grain patterns. Video 12 walked through building a simple side table, including a modification she added at the end, a secret compartment built into one of the legs. Video 15 covered staining and finishing techniques. I watched through the night, my grandmother's voice filling the empty barn. In the early videos, she looked younger, stronger. Her hands were steadier, her voice more certain. But as the numbers climbed, video 20, 30, 40, I watched her age before my eyes. The tremor in her hands grew worse. Her voice became thinner, more tired. She was racing against time, trying to leave me everything she knew before it was too late. At 3 in the morning, I reached video 47, the last one she ever made. On screen, Miriam looked frailer than I'd ever seen her. Illness had carved hollows under her cheekbones. Her hands shook as she adjusted the camera, but her eyes were still sharp, still clear, still full of the fierce love that had driven her to make all these recordings. Iris. Her voice was barely above a whisper. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone and you're trying to figure out what to do with all of this. With the farm and the tools and the mess I've left behind. She smiled, and even through the screen across time and death, it felt like she was smiling directly at me. I don't know if you'll want to learn this craft. I don't know if you'll keep the farm or sell it or burn it all to the ground. Whatever you decide, I'll understand. I just wanted you to know that you come from a line of makers and creators. Your great-great-grandfather built this barn with his own hands. Your grandfather made the stone walls that still stand on this property. Your mother, God rest her soul, was an incredible artist before she left Vermont. Her voice became fiercer, more intense. It's in your blood, Iris, this need to create something beautiful and lasting. Whether you express it through woodworking or something else entirely doesn't matter. What matters is that you honor that heritage, that you build something real with your life. Then she leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something urgent and deadly serious. Now listen carefully, because this is the most important thing I have to tell you. If anyone ever comes to you claiming I owed them money, claiming I signed a contract with them, don't believe it. There's a man named Vincent Mercer who's been trying to cheat people in this area for years. He came to me once, tried to pressure me into signing some papers. I threw him off my property and told him if I ever saw his face again, I'd call the sheriff. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Miriam reached off camera and held up a piece of paper. The camera zoomed slightly, and I could see it was a document with her signature at the bottom. This is my signature, the real one. See this little mark under the M? I leaned closer to the laptop screen. There was a mark. Tiny, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. A small diagonal line beneath the first letter of her name, like a secret symbol only she would know to add. It's barely visible unless you know to look for it. I've put that mark on every document I've signed since your grandfather died. It's my way of making absolutely sure no one can forge my name. If anyone ever shows you a signature that doesn't have this mark, you'll know it's fake. The video ended.
I sat in the darkness of the barn, my hands shaking worse than my grandmother's had been in that final recording. I grabbed Vincent Mercer's contract and studied the signature at the bottom with new eyes. Miriam E. Hartwell. The handwriting looked almost identical to my grandmother's shaky script. Almost. Because there was no mark under the M. Nothing at all. It was a forgery.
Vincent Mercer had lied, and I could prove it. I pulled out my phone to call Sheriff Crane, then stopped. It was 3:30 in the morning. But more than that, Miriam's words echoed in my mind. Inside the box is everything you need to protect yourself. The video had given me proof of the forgery, but my grandmother had said the box contained everything else I needed. There was more. Something she'd prepared specifically for this moment. But I still didn't have the key.
I made more coffee and forced myself to think systematically. Miriam had said I'd find the key when I was ready, when I'd learned enough to understand what she was trying to teach me. She designed it as a test, a way to ensure that only someone who truly engaged with her craft would be able to open the box. I went back through the videos I'd watched, looking for clues. In video 12, she demonstrated building that side table with the secret compartment. Every piece of furniture should have a secret, she'd said. Something only the maker knows about. It's like leaving a piece of yourself hidden inside the wood. Secret compartments. Hidden spaces that looked like solid wood until you knew exactly where to press. I thought about the furniture in the barn, the completed pieces my grandmother had made over the years. Had she hidden the key in one of them? I checked them all when I first explored the workshop, running my hands over smooth surfaces, admiring the craftsmanship. But I hadn't been looking for hidden compartments. I spent the next hour examining each piece methodically, pressing, tapping, looking for panels that might swing open or drawers that might slide out. I found nothing. Exhaustion was making my thoughts fuzzy. I sat down at the workbench to rest, and my eyes fell on the small side table I'd built 2 weeks ago. My first attempt at furniture making, following the tutorial from video 12, step by step. It wasn't impressive. One leg was slightly shorter than the others, requiring a shim to keep it level, and the finish was uneven in places where I'd applied too much stain. But I'd made it with my own hands, transforming raw wood into something functional. Video 12. The one where Miriam had demonstrated the secret compartment modification. I stood up so fast the chair toppled backward. I grabbed the table and flipped it over, examining each leg carefully. They looked identical, solid. Nothing to suggest any of them was different from the others, but I pressed on the inside of the first leg anyway. Nothing. Second leg. Nothing. Third leg. A soft click. A small panel popped open, revealing a hollow space carved into the wood, and nestled in that space, wrapped in worn velvet, was a tiny brass key. My hands were shaking as I picked it up, such a small thing to hold so much meaning. My grandmother had designed this test, knowing that only someone who truly learned her craft would be able to find what she'd hidden. She trusted me to figure it out, to become the kind of person who could understand what she was trying to teach. Thank you, Grandma. The words came out as barely more than a whisper. I carried the key to the tack room like it was made of glass. The locked box sat exactly where I'd left it, my name carved into the lid above those mysterious words, "Open when you're ready." The key slid into a lock so cunningly hidden I couldn't see where it was even as I turned it. The mechanism released with a soft click that sounded loud in the quiet barn. I lifted the lid with trembling hands. Inside were 3 items. The first was a leather-bound journal, different from the others I'd found. This one was labeled Business Records and Important Notes, 1990 to present. I opened it carefully, scanning pages filled with my grandmother's meticulous handwriting. Dates, clients, sales figures, all recorded with obsessive detail. Then I found an entry that made my breath catch. The date was 8 years ago, almost to the day. Vincent Mercer came to the farm today, tried to pressure me into signing a contract for a commission I never agreed to.
When I refused, he threatened to make trouble for me. I threw him off my property and told him never to return. This man is a fraud and a con artist. I will never do business with him under any circumstances. Below the entry, she'd taped a copy of an unsigned contract. The same contract Vincent had tried to get her to sign 8 years ago. And next to it, she'd written a note in red ink. "Keep this as evidence. He'll try again someday. If not with me, then with whoever inherits this place after I'm gone." She'd known. Somehow she'd known that Vincent Mercer would come back, would try to use a fake contract to steal what she'd spent her life building. And she'd prepared for it, leaving behind exactly the evidence I would need to fight him. The second item in the box was a manila envelope thick with documents. I opened it and found bank statements going back decades, property records, and a detailed inventory of every piece of furniture my grandmother had ever made and sold. There was also a notarized letter from Atticus Whitfield, dated 6 months before her death, certifying that Miriam Estelle Hartwell had never entered into any business arrangement with Vincent Mercer or any of his known associates. Legal proof. Documented, notarized, irrefutable. But it was the third item that shattered me completely. Another envelope, this one with different handwriting. Younger, steadier, without the tremor of age or illness. The return address was in Cleveland, Ohio. My mother's handwriting. I recognized it from the few birthday cards that had survived my childhood, the ones I'd kept hidden and protected through every foster home and group facility. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the envelope. The letter inside was dated 3 days before the accident that killed my parents. "Dear Mom," it began. I had to stop and remember how to breathe. My mother had called her Mom, not Miriam, not mother with cold formality. Mom, like a daughter who loved her mother despite everything that had come between them. I've been trying to write this letter for months, but I could never find the right words. So I'm just going to say it and hope you understand. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for leaving the way I did, without looking back. I'm sorry for the years of silence when I should have called. I'm sorry for letting pride and stubbornness keep me away from you for so long. David and I have been talking a lot lately about the future, about what kind of life we want for Iris as she grows up. And I keep thinking about the farm, about Vermont, about all the things I ran away from when I was too young and too angry to know better. I want Iris to know where she comes from. I want her to walk the fields the way I did when I was a girl. I want her to learn about our family's history. I want her to understand that she has roots, even if I tried to pretend I didn't. We're planning to come visit this summer. I know it's been too long. And I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after everything. But I'm asking anyway. I want to come home, Mom. I want to bring your granddaughter to meet you. I want to start over, all of us together, and try to build something better than what we had before. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too stubborn and too proud to say it. I hope it's not too late for us. Your daughter, Claire. 3 days later, she was dead. 3 days. They'd been 3 days away from coming home. 3 days away from reconciliation. 3 days away from me meeting my grandmother as a child, from having the family my mother wanted for me, from a life that made sense. And it had all been stolen by a rainy November night and a car that slid off the road. I sat on the floor of the tack room for a long time, holding my mother's letter while tears ran down my face unchecked.
All those years of feeling unwanted, all those nights wondering what was wrong with me. And my mother had been planning to bring me home. My grandmother had been waiting for us. But fate had other plans. The grief was overwhelming, a wave that crashed over me and pulled me under. I grieved for the grandmother I never knew, for the mother I barely remembered, for the family that should have been mine, for the summer that never came, for the reconciliation that died before it could begin, for the life that was stolen from all of us. But mixed with the grief was something else, something fierce and bright and absolutely unbreakable. They had loved me. Both of them, in their own imperfect ways, had loved me deeply. My grandmother had spent 14 years trying to reach me through those letters, 14 years planning for the day I would finally come home. My mother had wanted to give me roots, wanted me to know where I came from. And they had left me everything I needed to build the life they'd dreamed of. I wasn't going to let Vincent Mercer take that away. Not now. Not ever. I called Sheriff Crane at 7 in the morning, the earliest I could justify disturbing him. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the early hour. I found everything. The words tumbled out of me in a rush. The video where Grandma explains the secret signature mark. Vincent's contract doesn't have it. It's a forgery. And she left a journal entry from 8 years ago documenting when he tried to con her the first time. Plus an unsigned copy of the contract he wanted her to sign back then. And a notarized letter from her attorney stating she never did business with him. Sheriff Crane was quiet for a beat, then let out a low whistle. That clever woman. That incredibly clever woman. Is it enough to stop him? It's a start. A damn good start. But we need to move carefully. Vincent will fight back with his own lawyers, his own experts. The signature mark is strong evidence, but we'll need everything else to back it up. Bring it all to my office this morning. We'll build the case properly. I'll be there at 9. I spent the next hour carefully documenting everything. I made copies of the journal entry, photographed the unsigned contract from 8 years ago, compiled the notarized letter and bank statements. I paused the video at the exact moment my grandmother held up her signature, capturing a clear image of the secret mark beneath the M. Then I placed my mother's letter carefully back in the box. That one was private. That one was just for me. Sheriff Crane was waiting for me when I arrived. He spread the documents across his desk methodically, the video screenshot showing the signature mark, Vincent's contract with no mark, the journal entry from 8 years ago, the unsigned contract, the notarized letter. This is it. His voice was quiet but certain. This is what we've needed for 5 years. But Vincent said he has experts, lawyers. Let him have them. Sheriff Crane looked up at me, and there was something like satisfaction in his eyes. The signature mark is forensic evidence. Either it's there or it isn't. His experts can't argue with that, and the journal entry from 8 years ago establishes pattern. Combined with what we have from the Henderson and Morrison families, we can prove he's been running this con for years. So what happens now? Now we file charges. Fraud, forgery, attempted theft by deception. The county attorney will want to interview you, get your statement on record, and then... He smiled grimly. Then we arrest Vincent Mercer. When? He gave me 24 hours, so we'll give him less than that. He picked up his phone. I'm calling the county attorney right now. With any luck, we'll have a warrant by this afternoon. I sat in the sheriff's office while he made calls, while the county attorney arrived and took my statement, while lawyers and deputies came and went discussing evidence and procedure. The morning blurred into afternoon. At some point, someone brought me coffee and a sandwich I couldn't taste. At 3 o'clock, Sheriff Crane walked back into his office with a piece of paper in his hand. "We have the warrant. Vincent Mercer is about to have a very bad day." The arrest happened at Vincent's office in Burlington, a sleek space in a modern building that screamed money and respectability. I wasn't there, but Sheriff Crane called me afterward to tell me how it went. He tried to bluff, act outraged, threaten lawsuits. But when we showed him the signature analysis and the journal entry, he went quiet. He knew we had him. What happens now? He'll be arraigned tomorrow. The county attorney is confident we can make the charges stick. Between your evidence and what we have from the other families, Vincent Mercer is looking at serious prison time. The relief was so intense it made me dizzy, but Sheriff Crane's next words tempered it. "But Iris, you need to understand, this is just the beginning. Vincent has expensive lawyers. They'll file motions, challenge evidence, drag this out as long as they can. The arraignment is tomorrow, but the trial could be months away. And he'll make bail. Men like Vincent always do." The ice returned to my stomach. "So he'll be free?" "For now, but we'll have conditions. Restraining orders, travel restrictions, and we'll be watching him." He paused. "Don't let this shake you. We have the evidence. Justice might not be immediate, but it's coming." I thanked him and ended the call, then sat in the farmhouse kitchen watching the sunset paint the Vermont sky in impossible colors. The arrest was a victory, but not the final one. The real fight was still ahead. I walked to the barn as darkness fell, to the tack room where my grandmother's videos waited. I had 39 more to watch. 39 more lessons from a woman who'd loved me enough to prepare for a day she'd never see. But before I started the next video, I pulled my mother's letter from the box and read it again. "I want to come home, Mom. They'd never made it. But I had. I was home, in the place my mother wanted me to be, surrounded by the legacy my grandmother had spent decades building. The locked box sat empty now, all its secrets revealed. But I didn't put it away. Instead, I set it on the shelf where I could see it, a reminder of the test my grandmother had designed, the key I'd found, the evidence that might save my inheritance. Might. Not would. Not yet. Sheriff Crane had sounded confident, but I'd learned not to trust confidence. Vincent Mercer had money and lawyers and decades of experience manipulating the system. The arrest was just the beginning. The real fight would come in courtrooms and depositions and legal battles I didn't fully understand. Outside, the sun had set completely. The fields were dark under a sky full of stars I'd never been able to see through Cleveland's light pollution. A chill wind rattled the barn doors, reminding me that winter wasn't quite finished with Vermont. I sat at my grandmother's desk, surrounded by her tools and her journals, and the evidence that might not be enough. Tomorrow, Vincent would be arraigned. Tomorrow, he'd walk free on bail. Tomorrow, the legal machinery would grind into motion, slow and uncertain. But tonight, I had this barn. I had my grandmother's videos and her voice teaching me across the void of death. I had evidence that proved she'd loved me, that she'd prepared for this moment, that she'd believed I was strong enough to fight. I didn't know if I was strong enough. I didn't know if the evidence would hold up in court. I didn't know what Vincent would do next or how long this battle would last. But I wasn't running. Whatever came next, I would face it here. The farm was mine. The legacy was mine. And I would fight for it with everything I had, the same way my grandmother had fought to reach me for 14 years, the same way my mother had planned to bring me home. They had never given up on me. I wouldn't give up on what they'd left behind. The morning after Vincent's arraignment, Sheriff Crane called with news that made my stomach drop. Vincent's lawyer was filing a motion to dismiss the charges, claiming the signature analysis was inconclusive and the journal entry was hearsay. How can they say it's inconclusive? The mark is either there or it isn't. They're arguing that the mark could have been inconsistently applied, that handwriting varies over time, that expert analysis requires more extensive testing. It's all legal maneuvering.
The county attorney thinks we'll prevail, but it's going to take time. How much time? Could be weeks, could be months. Vincent's out on bail and his lawyer's already talking about countersuing for defamation. The fear I'd been holding at bay crashed over me. Vincent was free. He had lawyers and money and time. And I had a farm I barely knew how to maintain and savings that wouldn't last forever. Iris. Sheriff Crane's voice pulled me back. Don't panic. We knew this wouldn't be easy. The evidence is solid. We just have to be patient. But patience meant living with uncertainty. It meant looking over my shoulder, wondering if Vincent would try something else. I'm going to assign a deputy to do regular patrols past your property, just as a precaution. And I want you to keep detailed records of any contact Vincent or his associates try to make. Anything at all. You call me immediately. I promised I would, and hung up feeling like the floor had turned to quicksand beneath my feet. That afternoon, I heard the sound of hammering outside. I walked out to find a pickup truck I didn't recognize parked near the barn. A man about my age was replacing one of the rotted boards on the porch, working with the kind of efficient precision that spoke of years of practice. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. Tall and lean, with work-roughened hands and brown hair that fell across his forehead. His smile was easy, genuine. You must be Iris. I'm Sawyer Gallagher. Fletcher asked me to come by and help with some repairs. He gestured toward the porch. This wood's been bad for a while. Figured I'd get started before you even woke up. I blinked at him, still processing. Fletcher sent you? He and my dad go back 30 years. When Fletcher called last night and said Miriam's granddaughter might need some help around the place, I cleared my schedule. There was no pity in his voice, no sense that he was doing charity work, just straightforward competence and a willingness to help that felt completely natural. You didn't have to do that. Sawyer set down his hammer and looked at me directly. Your grandmother helped my family 6 years ago, when we needed it most. My dad broke his leg right at planting season. We couldn't afford to hire help and couldn't afford to lose the crop. Miriam showed up one morning and said she needed consulting on her furniture designs, that she'd pay full wages for my dad's expertise. He paused, and something soft moved through his expression. Everyone in town knew she didn't need consulting. She was the best furniture maker in 3 counties, but she found a way to support us without making it feel like we were taking charity. The story echoed what Fletcher had told me, but hearing it from Sawyer himself hit differently. My grandmother had quietly woven a network of kindness through this community, helping people in ways that preserved their dignity, and now that community was returning the favor. I appreciate this, I really do. Fletcher mentioned you might have some trouble with a man named Vincent Mercer. The name landed like a stone in my chest. News traveled fast in small towns. Sheriff Crane arrested him yesterday, but he made bail, his lawyers filing motions to dismiss. Sawyer's expression darkened slightly. Vincent Mercer doesn't give up easy. My grandmother almost sold to one of his associates before she passed. We barely stopped her in time. The man's got connections, expensive lawyers. He'll fight this. The thought sent ice through my veins. What if Vincent found a way out? What if his lawyers got the charges dropped? Sawyer must have seen something in my face because his voice gentled. But you're not fighting him alone.
This community takes care of its own. And whether you know it yet or not, you're one of us now.
Over the next few days, I discovered what Sawyer meant. Opal arrived with enough food to feed me for a week, along with quiet updates. Fletcher had called Patricia Henderson, the woman who'd lost her farm to Vincent 3 years ago. She wanted to testify if it came to trial. Elizabeth Morrison, another victim from 5 years back, had reached out to Sheriff Crane offering the same. The hardware store owner stopped by with supplies I hadn't asked for, saying Fletcher had mentioned the porch needed work and these were on special. The woman who ran the feed supply brought documentation of Vincent trying to pressure her elderly mother into selling land cheap a decade ago. Support came in quiet ways, not with dramatic gestures, but with the steady reliability of people who'd seen injustice and decided enough was enough. This community was standing with me, and somehow that made the uncertainty more bearable. But it was Sawyer who became a constant presence. He worked on the porch in the mornings, replaced broken windows in the afternoon, helped me inventory my grandmother's finished furniture pieces in the evenings. We didn't talk much during the work. He'd explain what he was doing and why, answer my questions about the property or the town, then fall into comfortable silence. On the third evening, as we were cataloging a beautiful cherry wood cabinet, he broke the quiet with a question. "Are you going to keep the farm?" I had been asking myself the same thing since I arrived. The smart choice would be to sell, take the money, go to college, start a life somewhere easier. But every time I thought about leaving, something in my chest tightened like a fist. "I think so." The words felt true as I spoke them. "I want to learn her craft, build on what she started." Sawyer nodded as if this made perfect sense. "My family's farm is about 2 miles down the road. Organic vegetables mostly, some herbs. Been thinking lately about diversification." Ways to make small farms more sustainable. He ran his hand over the smooth surface of the cabinet, the gesture unconsciously echoing how I'd learned to check for flaws in the finish. Then wondering if there might be something interesting in combining a working farm with a furniture workshop. A destination, maybe. Place where people could come buy handcrafted furniture and fresh produce, learn traditional skills, connect with something real. The idea settled into me like a seed finding soil. Not just keeping my grandmother's legacy alive, but building on it, growing it into something new. I'd like that. His smile was quiet but genuine. "Then we'll figure it out together." 3 weeks after the arrest, Vincent Mercer returned to the farm. I was in the barn trying to focus on video number 23 when I heard his Mercedes pull up. Sawyer had left an hour earlier to handle something at his family's farm. Fletcher and Opal were in town. The afternoon sun slanted through the barn doors, turning the sawdust golden. I walked out to meet him, and this time there was no pretense of civility in his approach. He strode toward me with barely controlled rage, his expensive suit somehow making him look more predatory. "You think you've won?" His voice was low and dangerous. "You think arresting me changes anything?" I kept my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Sheriff Crane has evidence. The signature mark proves you forged the contract." Vincent laughed, sharp and humorless. "Evidence? I have lawyers who'll tear that apart. The mark could be inconsistent. Your grandmother was elderly, her handwriting varied. Expert witnesses will testify that signature analysis isn't conclusive. And that journal entry? Hearsay from a dead woman." He took a step closer. I fought the urge to back away. "You're a foster kid who stumbled into something you don't understand. You think this community will protect you? They'll get bored. They'll move on. And I'll still be here, with my lawyers and my money and my patience. I can drag this through courts for years.
I can bury you in legal fees. I can make sure you spend every penny your grandmother left you on a fight you can't win." Before I could respond, Sheriff Crane's cruiser pulled into the driveway with lights flashing. The sheriff climbed out with deliberate calm, but his hand rested near his weapon. "Mr. Mercer, I've been informed you made contact with Miss Walker despite the restraining order prohibiting such contact. That's a problem." Vincent's carefully constructed composure cracked.
"I have every right to conduct business discussions. You have the right to conduct business through proper legal channels, not through intimidation on private property." Sheriff Crane moved between Vincent and me, a wall of authority. "Miss Walker has filed a formal complaint about your threatening behavior, and we've just received testimony from Patricia Henderson and Elizabeth Morrison regarding similar patterns in your previous cases. The county attorney is very interested in speaking with you about that." Vincent's face went pale. Those cases were settled under duress with forged documents. The pattern matches exactly what you're attempting here. Sheriff Crane gestured toward his cruiser. "Now you can leave peacefully, or I can arrest you right now for witness intimidation and violating a restraining order. Your choice." For a moment, Vincent looked like he might argue. Then something in his posture crumbled, the predator realizing the trap had closed. "This isn't over."
Actually, Sheriff Crane's voice was hard as stone. "It is. We have everything we need. The signature forgery, the pattern of fraud, multiple victims willing to testify. Your lawyer can file all the motions he wants, but the evidence doesn't lie. You're going to prison, Mr. Mercer. The only question is for how long." Vincent walked back to his Mercedes without another word, but the look he gave me before driving away was pure hatred. A cornered animal was the most dangerous kind. Sheriff Crane turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "He violated the restraining order. That's a separate charge we can add. But more importantly, it shows a pattern of behavior the judge will consider." He paused. "The trial date just got set, 6 weeks from now. County attorney is confident, and with Henderson and Morrison willing to testify about their experiences, we have a solid case." 6 weeks felt like both forever and no time at all. I threw myself into learning my grandmother's craft, working through her videos with obsessive focus. The repetitive motions of measuring, cutting, sanding became meditation. A way to quiet the anxiety that threatened to overwhelm me whenever I thought too hard about the upcoming trial. Sawyer was there most days, sometimes working on repairs, sometimes just keeping me company. We fell into an easy rhythm, the kind of comfortable partnership that felt both new and ancient at the same time. On a cool April morning, as we were replacing fence posts along the eastern property line, he spoke without looking up from his work. "After the trial, whatever happens, you'll still have this place. You'll still have the skills you're learning. Vincent can't take that away." The words settled over me like a blanket. He was right. Even if the worst happened, even if somehow Vincent's lawyers found a way to win, I'd still have what my grandmother had really given me. Not just property, but knowledge, heritage, roots. What if I lose the farm? Sawyer looked at me directly then, his eyes serious. Then you rebuild somewhere else. But I don't think you will. I think your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing when she left you that evidence. The trial happened on a Tuesday in county court. I sat in the front row, with Fletcher on one side and Sawyer on the other, watching as the county attorney systematically dismantled Vincent's defense. The signature expert testified about the missing mark, demonstrating with enlarged photographs how every authentic Miriam Hartwell signature from the past 40 years contained the distinctive diagonal line beneath the M. Vincent's contract had none. Patricia Henderson testified about losing her farm to an identical scheme 3 years ago. Elizabeth Morrison described the same pattern 5 years before that. The county attorney introduced the journal entry from 8 years ago, establishing that Vincent had targeted my grandmother before and been rejected. Vincent's lawyer tried to argue coincidence, inconsistency, reasonable business dispute, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts.
I watched Vincent Mercer being led away in handcuffs, and the relief was so intense it made me dizzy. It was over. Really over. Outside the courthouse, Sheriff Crane shook my hand with genuine warmth. Your grandmother would be proud. You didn't just save your farm. You stopped him from doing this to anyone else. Patricia Henderson approached with tears in her eyes.
Thank you. I lost my family's farm, but maybe this will help me find some peace knowing he can't hurt anyone else. Elizabeth Morrison simply hugged me. No words needed. The words settled into me like sunlight after a long winter.
6 months transformed everything. The farm that had seemed overwhelming when I arrived became familiar territory. I learned which boards on the porch groaned loudest, which windows stuck in the humidity, where the best light came through the barn in the afternoon. I worked through all 47 of my grandmother's videos, practicing each technique until my hands developed the calluses of someone who made things. My first real commission came from the owner of a gallery in Burlington. A dining table, walnut, using one of Miriam's classic designs. It took me 3 months. There were moments when I was certain I'd ruined everything, when I had to sand down entire sections and start over. But Sawyer was patient, teaching me what Fletcher had taught him, what my grandmother had taught a generation of craftspeople through her quiet generosity. When I delivered the finished table, the gallery owner ran her hands over the surface with reverence. This is extraordinary work. You have your grandmother's gift. The check she gave me was enough to cover 3 months of property taxes and insurance. Enough to prove I could actually do this. Build a life here. Support myself through the craft my grandmother had spent decades perfecting. Sawyer and I had formalized our collaboration. His family's organic farm now had a permanent stand at the southern edge of my property, selling vegetables and herbs 3 days a week. Next to it, we'd converted one of the outbuildings into a small showroom for furniture. My pieces alongside work from 2 other local craftspeople Sawyer had connected me with. On Saturdays, we offered workshops. Basic woodworking for beginners. Opal taught canning and preserving. Fletcher demonstrated traditional joinery techniques. People drove from Burlington, from Montpelier, from as far as New Hampshire and Massachusetts. The kind of people who wanted to learn old skills, who valued things made by hand that would last for generations. The first time someone called it a destination, I thought of that conversation with Sawyer months earlier. We'd built something together, something real and growing. But more than the business, more than the farm thriving, was the way I'd stopped feeling like a visitor in my own life. Fletcher and Opal had become the parental figures I'd never had. Sawyer had become something I didn't have words for yet, but every day we worked side by side felt like building toward a future I wanted. The community had absorbed me so completely that sometimes I forgot I'd only been here 6 months. When people asked how long I'd lived in Vermont, I had to stop and count. It felt like forever. It felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. On the 6-month anniversary of my arrival, I drove to the cemetery on the hill overlooking town. My grandmother's grave was marked by a simple stone. Miriam Estelle Hartwell, 1946 to 2025. Beloved mother, grandmother, craftsman. I knelt in the grass and pulled out the small box I'd brought. Inside was my first finished piece, not the commissioned table, but something I'd made just for this moment. A jewelry box carved from cherry wood, the joints so precise you couldn't see the seams.
The lid was inlaid with a pattern I'd designed myself, geometric shapes that echoed the stone walls on the farm. On the bottom, I'd carved an inscription. For Grandma, with love and gratitude, Iris. I placed it on the grave, my hand steady despite the tears on my face. I came home, Grandma. I know you can't hear me. I know you're gone. But I needed to tell you that I understand now. Why you couldn't take me in when I was 7. Why you spent 14 years trying to reach me through those letters. Why you prepared everything so carefully for a day you'd never see. A bird called somewhere in the trees behind me. The wind moved through the grass with a sound like whispered secrets. I used to think being wanted meant someone choosing you over everything else. But you taught me it's more complicated than that. Sometimes love means knowing your limitations. Sometimes it means planning for a future you won't be part of. Sometimes it means trusting that the seeds you plant will grow even after you're gone. I ran my fingers over the jewelry box, feeling the smooth wood beneath my hands. Mom wanted to bring me home that summer. I found her letter. She wrote it 3 days before. I had to stop and breathe through the grief that still caught me unexpectedly. 3 days before the accident. She was coming back to you. She wanted me to have roots here. And I do now. Because of you. Because you never stopped fighting for me even when the system wouldn't let you reach me. Because you left me everything I needed to build a life worth living. The tears came harder. I let them fall onto the grass, onto the jewelry box, onto the stone that bore my grandmother's name. I won't let you down. I'm going to keep the farm, keep learning the craft, and I'm going to teach it to others the way you would have wanted. Pass it forward. I stayed there for a long time, talking to a woman who'd never answered me in life, but whose love had found me anyway. The sun moved across the sky, the shadows lengthened, and slowly, the grief transformed into something else, something that felt like peace. You were loved, Miriam, by your daughter, by this community, by me. Even though we never got to know each other the way we should have, you were loved. And that matters. That means something. On my way back to the farm, I stopped at the county foster care office. I'd been thinking about this for weeks, turning the idea over in my mind like one of my grandmother's pieces of wood, examining it from every angle. The social worker who met with me was younger than Mrs. Delacroix, with eyes that hadn't yet developed that particular kind of weariness. I want to register as a host family. For teenagers aging out of the system, 17 to 21, kids who need a place to transition, learn some skills, figure out their next steps. She studied me carefully. You're only 21 yourself. I know what they're going through. I know what it feels like to age out with nothing. And I have a farm that needs help, a craft I can teach, a community that's willing to support them. We talked for an hour about requirements, background checks, training I'd need to complete. It would take months to get approved. But the seed was planted. I thought about my grandmother taking in Fletcher's family through the fiction of consulting work. Thought about Opal feeding me for weeks without ever making it feel like charity. Thought about a community that had decided I belonged before I'd earned it. This was how you built something that lasted. Not just through furniture that would survive generations, but through kindness that multiplied itself forward through time. 3 weeks later, a social worker called. We have a girl who just aged out, 19 years old. She's been in the system since she was 10. Interested in agricultural work, maybe sustainable farming. Angry and scared and trying not to show it. I smiled because I knew that girl. I'd been that girl. What's her name? Briar Kensington. When can she come?
Briar arrived on a Tuesday morning, with everything she owned in 2 duffel bags and a backpack. She stepped out of the social worker's car with her shoulders squared and her jaw set, ready to fight the world if it gave her a reason. I recognized that posture. I'd worn it myself 6 months ago. You must be Briar. I'm Iris. I extended my hand and watched her evaluate whether to take it. She did, finally, her grip firm enough to challenge. This is the farm. I gestured toward the property. 68 acres. The house needs work, but it's solid. The barn is where I make furniture. You don't have to learn the craft if you don't want to, but I can teach you if you're interested. She didn't respond, just looked around with the careful assessment of someone deciding if this was a place she could tolerate. How long do I have to stay? As long as you want, or as long as you need. There's no time limit. That made her look at me directly for the first time. What's the catch? No catch. You help with the farm and the workshops if you're willing. You figure out what you want to do next. And when you're ready to leave, you leave. Briar's expression suggested she didn't believe me. Fair enough. I hadn't believed it either when Opal first showed up with casseroles and kindness. Let me show you your room. 2 days later, I found Briar in the barn, running her fingers over one of my grandmother's finished pieces. A cabinet made of maple, the grain pattern flowing like water. This is beautiful. My grandmother made it. She taught herself after my grandfather died, built this whole business from nothing. Briar was quiet for a moment. Then, why are you doing this? Taking in some random foster kid? Because someone left me a farm when I had nothing. Because a community helped me when I couldn't help myself. Because I know what it's like to age out thinking no one wants you. I picked up a piece of scrap wood from the workbench, felt the weight of it in my hands. And because there's something powerful about making things that last, about taking raw material and transforming it into something beautiful. I think everyone should get to learn that if they want to. I don't know anything about woodworking. Neither did I 6 months ago. But my grandmother left videos, 47 of them, patient instructions for every technique. And I can teach you what she taught me. Briar looked at the cabinet again, then at me. What if I'm not good at it? Then you'll learn what you are good at. This isn't about forcing you into anything. It's about giving you options, space to figure out who you want to be. She nodded slowly. Okay. Show me. We started with the basics. How to select wood based on grain and strength. How to measure precisely. How to use hand tools before graduating to power equipment. Briar was careful and methodical, asking questions when she didn't understand, practicing cuts until her hands developed the muscle memory. On the 3rd day, Sawyer stopped by with vegetables from his farm and found us working together in the barn. He caught my eye over Briar's bent head and smiled, the kind of smile that said he understood exactly what I was building here. After Briar went inside for lunch, Sawyer stayed behind. She reminds me of you. I laughed. I was never that prickly. You were terrified and trying to hide it. Same thing, different mask. He was right, of course. Briar's anger was armor against a world that had given her every reason not to trust it. She'll do good here. His voice was quiet with certainty. You're giving her what your grandmother gave you. A foundation. Roots. I hope so. He pulled me close, and I leaned into the solid warmth of him. 6 months ago, I'd been alone on a Greyhound bus, heading toward an inheritance I didn't understand. Now I had this. Community and purpose, and someone who chose to build a future alongside me. Later that evening, I set up my laptop in the barn and pulled up the folder of my grandmother's videos.
Briar sat beside me, watching as Miriam's face filled the screen. Video number 1. Introduction to Basic Woodworking. That's her? Briar's voice was quiet. That's her. Miriam Estelle Hartwell, my grandmother. Miriam on the screen smiled that warm, patient smile and began to speak. Welcome. I'm recording this because I want to share what I've learned over 40 years of working with wood. But more than that, I want to share why it matters. The things we create with our hands carry pieces of our souls forward into the future. They outlast us. They connect generations. Briar leaned forward, caught by something in Miriam's voice. The wood will tell you what it wants to become. You just have to learn how to listen. I glanced at the shelf behind us where I'd placed a photograph. 3 generations of women. Miriam, my mother Claire, and me. 3 women who'd never stood together in life, but were connected by love that survived death and distance and time. Briar pointed to the photo. That's your mom and your grandma? Yeah. They look like you. Same eyes. The observation settled over me like a blessing. I did have my grandmother's eyes, my mother's determination, their capacity to create beautiful things from raw material, whether that meant furniture, or families, or futures built on foundations of love. Come on. I stood and gestured for Briar to follow. Let me show you something. In the tack room, I opened the wooden box my grandmother had made for me, empty now of its secrets, but still precious. She made this for me,
Locked it, and hid the key where only someone who learned her craft could find it. Inside was everything I needed to protect my inheritance and understand my family. I handed the box to Briar, let her feel the weight of it, examine the precision of the joints. Someday, if you want, I'll teach you how to make something like this. Something that will outlast you. Something that carries your story forward. Briar ran her fingers over the carved letters of my name. You really think I could? I know you could. Because I did. And 6 months ago, I didn't believe I could do anything. Outside, the sun was setting over the Vermont hills, painting the sky in those impossible colors that still took my breath away. The farm that had seemed so overwhelming when I arrived felt like home now, felt like exactly where I was supposed to be. I'd spent 14 years believing I was alone, that no one wanted me, that I had nothing and no one. But my grandmother had been writing to me all along. My mother had been planning to bring me home. And a community I'd never met had been waiting to welcome me. The letters had all been returned. The reunion had never happened. But love had found its way home anyway. And now I would pass it forward, teach what I'd been taught, give what I'd been given, build something real with my life, something that would outlast me, something that honored the heritage of makers and creators I came from. The wood will tell you what it wants to become, my grandmother had said. You just have to learn how to listen. I was listening now. And what I heard was the sound of a future being built. One careful cut at a time. One life transformed at a time. One act of love multiplying forward through generations. I was home. And I was exactly where I belonged.